Good afternoon and welcome to Blade Wise Volume 3. I'm Mike Meredith, owner and operator of Booger Woods Forge, and appropriately that's where we're at today. Jenny said that she thought it would be a good idea if I did a little shop tour, a little tutorial on how I make my blades kind of roughly, and later on as this series goes on we'll be getting into some of the exact processes that I use. Today I'm just going to kind of give you a little explanation, if you will, as to how the process from start to finish, how my knives are made. This shop is my dad's old cabinet shop. It was not set up for knife making originally. The few modifications that I made to it have been, I share space with his stuff and my brother-in-law's stuff. My father is now passed on, but I was making knives in this shop long before he did. In fact, some of the first knives that were ever churned out of this place were made by he and I whenever I was only about 12 years old. He was something of he dabbled in knife making. His primary thing was a woodworker. But anyway, to kind of give you an idea of what I've got to work with, you're going to find that I don't have a lot of tools. I do have a lot of know-how. As I read it in a book one time, there are people that have millions of dollars worth of equipment that still turn out crappy knives, and then there's guys that do it the old way, that have a few tools that make great knives. I'm not calling my product great, but it is good and it's serviceable. So if you order a knife from me, if you are the customer and you decide that you want to order a custom knife, we decide together on what that knife should look like, and I sketch it out on a piece of paper, and it's something that you agree on or you don't. We make modifications here and there. The John Shirley Skinner that's shown in Blade Wise Volume 1, you can go back to, please go back and look at that if you've not seen it yet, and you'll see that that's the knife, the finished product started out at once as an idea. It was transferred to paper. Now sometimes my ideas are not transferred to paper, they just start out on steel. And when we decide what that's going to be on steel, I will take a piece of reclaimed steel. Very rarely do I buy new steel. This is what they call a head saw blade, or what I've sometimes referred to as Paul Bunyan's skill saw blade. It's a piece of L6 steel. That particular piece is probably 75 years old or better, so I've been told. I do know that it is L6 steel, and the fact that it used to be a saw blade doesn't hurt it one bit. Or, if we're making a large buoy, one of my favorite things to make them out of is leaf springs. That's 5160 steel. That is a really old leaf spring. And what I'll do at first is I may take a wire wheel and clean that rust off of it and get it back bright. And then, if I'm making a buoy out of it, I'll take, which you hear me talk about buoys a lot because that's one of my favorite knives to make, and I think one of the best designs. I'll take this piece of soapstone right here, and I'll cheat a little bit. I'll cut a preform just by cutting a straight line there, and I'll use this angle grinder to make that cut. And then whenever I'm done making that preform looks nothing like the finished product. When I'm done making that preform out of either a piece of that, which this is a remnant. As a matter of fact, I think that it's either this piece or this piece that was the remnant of the Shirley Skinner was made out of L6. This is a remnant of the piece of bar stock that I cut the Don't Call Me Shirley edition Skinner out of. But what I will do once that I have this piece cut off is we will move out here to the forge. I'm trying to keep, I know it's kind of hard to follow somebody with a camera, so I'm going to walk slow because this is a narrow aisle we're going through here. As we're coming out the door, pay no attention to the vehicles and everything that are parked out here. Some of them are ours, some of them ain't. But the first thing I have to do when I get ready to forge a knife is come up with a suitable supply of lump charcoal. And I make my own lump charcoal. In that barrel right there, I had my brother-in-law weld a vent to the bottom of it where I can take it off. First I'll pile some twigs and straw in that barrel, and then I put larger pieces of wood. I'll either use hardwood or softwood, but I only make one kind at a time. Before that, I was purchasing my own charcoal, or charcoal from other sources before I started making my own. I want to send out a shout out and a thanks to Purgatory Ironworks that's also on YouTube, because he does an excellent tutorial on how to make your own charcoal. I will introduce an airstream in the bottom of that barrel to get it to burning hot, the same as I do in my forge. So I've got a really hot fire going in there when I put all my pieces in there. I'll stack the lid on top of it, then I'll usually wind up setting that piece of cinder block on top of it. And this was my old dog pen, by the way. My Walker Hound used to live here, or spend some time here. So everything at Booger Woods Forge used to be something else before I started making knives here. And I'll go ahead and I make my charcoal in there, usually a couple days in advance. Want to give it time to cool down. When that charcoal is made, we go out here to the forge. We'll take, if it was this piece of steel and this was cut off of it, we put it in the forge with our charcoal. Forge that I've also made myself. And as you can tell, it has got a lot of use out of it over the past 6 years or so that I've used this one. I run a blower to this pipe. It's a blower that I made myself out of an old shop vac motor, and I've got a leather flap on it that I use as a damper so I can control the air induction into it. And we go over here to the anvil. I have about 2 different hammers that I use. One thing that I forgot to bring out here was my this is one that I've just recently modified. The thing I forgot to bring out here was my vice grips. I use just a regular pair of vice grips to hold my steel, because that stuff does get warm. And it's the same pair of vice grips that I've used on every knife that I made. I've rounded the face of this hammer off so that I can drift steel out, you know, and taper it, because I do a lot of forging tapers on the fighting buoys that I make. This is a cross peen hammer. I'd say probably about 2 pound or something, that I use for a lot of my finishing work whenever I'm hammering out steel. This is a survival knife I'm working on for a local and fellow firefighter. He just kind of wants one of those, just a good wilderness knife. That started out from a piece of steel just like this, leaf spring that I forged out. I had to upset the back of it to make it thicker. And it started out with that preform. That was shaped using a bottom tool that I put in the hardy hole of my anvil, and I set it on here, and I would knock that down for the dent. Bunch of stock removals done started on this knife from at this point. Normally I don't like to do as much stock removal on a knife as I'm doing on this one. Normally I like to forge everything to shape, because when you're forging a buoy or a buoy shaped blade, if you've already got that angle cut on there, as you hammer the edge of this steel, it's going to push the spine of it up, and it's going to make that curvature. And what you're eventually going to have to do is do a straightening blow and straighten the back of it if you want the back to be straight. But I just believe that it makes a superior blade to forge it to shape, rather than to start out with a piece of steel and remove everything that doesn't look like a knife. And like I say, one of these days here before long, we're going to actually show a short demonstration of me forging a simple blade to shape. But when I'm done with, we'll just go ahead and take this piece back in here. When I'm done forging, and this can take a long time because my steel goes through 3 what I call normalizing cycles, where I will, during the process of forging it, I will take the blade out of the forge and allow it to cool in still air facing magnetic north for 3 times. And if it doesn't warp during the time that it's normalizing, chances are it won't warp during the quench as well. And which, you know, that's one thing I can't stand is warped or non-straight steel. So once that's done and it's forged to shape after it's had time to anneal in the forge, I come back in here to this shop. I take the forge blank, and it's going to be covered with scale from the forge, carbon scale. And normally I tie a string around it, and this pipe is full of vinegar, just regular household vinegar. I let that soak in there overnight. At that point, I'll work on something else if my day's not done. If my day is pretty well done, I'm going to the house, and when I come back in the morning, I'll take that out, and all that scale will be cleaned off of that blade, at least for the most part. Sometimes there's a little bit remaining on it, but all that scale will be etched off that blade. Then we'll come over here again to where we've already been. Our shop tour's coming full circle, and may go back out there again, depending on how I decide to do this. On this one, I've used, to get it to this point, I've used this Coop 2x72 belt grinder that's standing right here. This is really the only dedicated piece of knife making equipment that I have. As you can tell, it runs at a fairly high speed. I can control the speed of it by moving the belt on it. Eventually I'm wanting to get about a 3-horse variable speed motor to put on it. But I will usually grind on the platen or on the slack portion of the belt to get this shaped the way that I want it. Once I get this to around 220 grit finish, then it's time for me to heat treat it. Oh yeah, by the way, I will, before I heat treat my blades, I will either hot punch the holes out there if it's a historical replica, or drill them on the drill press over there to get my holes for my handle scales, my lanyard hole, or my thong tube hole, and everything. But I'll take it back out there to the forge when it's ready for heat treat. I will bring it up to non-magnetic, where it's hot enough that a magnet will not stick to it. Let it soak just for a moment or two longer. Then I will take my vice grips, and depending on the kind of blade that it is, I will quench it. My preference for quenching oil is peanut oil. I like using peanut oil. But I'll grab it with the vice grips by that edge, or by the top of the handle, and I will plunge the edge. I set a regulator block in my quench tank. I wish I had that over here to show you now. And I'll only quench about this much of the edge of that knife. That way you'll have a really tough cutting edge and a soft, forgiving spine. On some buoys, I will clay harden them. I'll use heat fence clay, and I'll put that clay on there and allow it to harden, and then just quench it in the pipe, hardening only the surfaces that are used to cut with. This knife is a really big, thick. It's going to be a hoss of a camp knife. I would say it's too heavy for my taste to use as a weapon, but it's going to be a heck of a camp knife. This is part of my survival gear here. This is the Mike Meredith Booger Woods sippy cup. It's actually made by Bubba Kid. Get you one. They're great. I keep 72 ounces of cold drink in there. That keeps me working all day. After the knife's heat treated, I'll do the rest of the final polish on it. By polishing, I mean I take it over here to this piece of steel covered in duct tape and steel shavings now. I put a pad of leather underneath it, and I will take one of these clamps and I will clamp my piece of bar stock to this right here. Then I use varying grits of handheld abrasives, also known as sandpaper and emery cloth. I'll start out, whenever I'm just hand finishing a knife, I'll start out 60 grit, and I usually put my sandpaper on a block. Sometimes I'll surface those with some rubber where they'll have a little bit of sponginess to them. And I just stand there, and 4, 5, 6 hours later, you've got a blade that's to a nice, about 1,000 degree wet sanded finish. I tell you all this because it's easy to explain it. But if you were to order a knife from me today, by the time that it gets done, even on the simplest piece, if I do a satin finish on the blade, I've got generally a week's worth of time invested in making that knife. Think about what you make as far as a week's salary. And so, you know, a lot of people wonder, and that's another thing I'll do one of these days, a program on how, you know, how some of these knife makers justify the cost of what they make. But as a general rule right now, a big survival knife like that's about a $300 knife. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort to make you the best knife that I can possibly make you. Here's another thing, and I'd set out here, I kind of got out of sync. This is a chunk of walnut that come from my neighbor across the road. He cut down a walnut tree years ago, and this set up in his loft for about 15 years along with a bunch of other walnut that he gave me. And I will, when I make walnut handles, this is what the handle of the Shirley Skinner was made out of, and you can see how pretty that finished whenever you watch volume 1 again. This is a piece of maple. I've got another piece sitting over here that's still got just the rough mill sawn finish on it. A little bit of figure in this maple, and it'll finish really pretty. That's two of the handle materials I like. I also like Osage orange, known by some people as Bodark. Another thing I don't have a block sitting without going back into the office or something to get, I don't think, is micarta. I make a lot of my fighting knives and you know, modern type combat and camp knives. I make the handles out of black canvas micarta, and that's a very great, very durable material choice. But I hand shape all that. You know, I use a lot of wood rasp, a lot of handheld abrasives, a lot of files, and everything. So when I'm making knives, they truly are handmade knives. There's nothing that reeks of factory production or, you know, even at this point. And someday soon, I'm hoping to introduce a mid-tech line where you know, I use machine parts and then you know, take some of the labor out of it to bring you a good product at a somewhat cheaper price. Over here is some old wagon wheel rims, well in excess of 100 years old. They're made of wrought iron. A lot of the guards that I do on knives are made of wrought iron, and you won't be able to tell that they'll be shiny and pretty when it gets done. But that's just to give you an idea of you know, what it takes to make you a good knife. I keep thinking that I'm almost done, but then I keep thinking of other things that I add. Every knife that I send out has a leather sheath with it, usually horsehide. I'll sit there at that bench and cut it out, dye it whatever color that you want. Here's some remnants of that horsehide that I've been making a lot of pistol holsters here lately. Here's where it was dyed black, but that's good quality American tanned horsehide, and it will outlast just about any other kind of leather that you could hope to have. Then I'll do the final sharpening on it on a set of those 3 oil stones sitting over there on top of that box with another box falling over on it. And then I do the final finish on that old razor strop over there, just like your barber sharpens his old straight razors with. And by the time all that's done, you've got something that when you open the box, you're proud to have. You could pass it down to your kids, and they can pass it on to their own kids. It's when you invest in a knife from me, I do everything in the world to make sure that it's an heirloom, something but a functional one at that. So until next time, stay sharp, stay safe. It's been good talking to you.